Hello you guys, welcome back to a new video, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to my, I think, very first official strictly book video here on YouTube. I've done a few book videos on like TikTok and Instagram and kind of toyed with book videos on here a little bit, kind of incorporating it into my vlogs. And also back when I was doing my podcast, I talked a little bit about books on there as well. So we've definitely, slowly incorporated books into my content. And you guys know, over the last couple of years or so, I've just gotten more and more into reading to the point where I feel like now it's such a huge part of who I am and basically my main hobby. I actually came into BookTube, like watching BookTube just this past year, like the last few months or so, and I kind of realized it was a thing and I fell in love with it, and I was like, wait, why am I not doing this? Like, I love to watch this stuff, I love to read, why would I not also make this content? I've always loved book talk, that's like no secret, but I feel like BookTube is such a special place on the internet because there's so many fun video ideas and trends that you can do with it, and I don't know, I'm kind of excited to like get into it. I'm definitely gonna still obviously be doing lots and lots of vlogs. That's my main thing, kind of always has been, but I really like the idea of incorporating some book videos here and there as well. For the very first video, I'm going to be doing a wrap-up video of sorts. So if you guys aren't familiar with this type of video, essentially a book wrap-up video is usually it's done like per month, or even people will do it per year, but it's a summary of basically all the books you read in a given period of time, what you thought of them, etc., etc. I think it'd be really fun to do one a month. I don't know how practical that is. We'll see if I end up doing that. I feel like I don't want to put that out there because I feel like that holds a lot of pressure if I like promise that. It is the third month of the year and I have read a decent amount of books. I think I've read 7 books and I think I'm on my 8th book and it's the middle of March. So I thought it'd be fun to do a year-to-date book wrap-up video of all the books that I've read so far in 2025. There's a decent variety in here as well. One thing I do pride myself in is I feel like, and part of this is me still exploring what I like to read and the type of writing I like, but I do feel like I really read a large variety of books. I don't think I really stick to just thrillers or just romance or anything like that. I think I definitely gravitate towards more of like the thriller type, but also this year, like I think I've only read 1, maybe 2 thrillers. Yeah, I think just 1. Hard to say. I think I'm really trying to explore more genres. I started Throne of Glass series last year and fell in love with it. I'm still in the middle of that, which I'll talk about, but like that's my first kind of taste into the fantasy world and I've been loving that. So I don't know, we're still definitely getting our feet on the ground with reading because like I said, I've only really been an avid reader for a couple of years now. The longer time goes on, the bigger of a reader I get and like the quicker I get through books and the quicker my turnaround time is. But at the same time, 2 years isn't really that long of a time in the grand scheme of things. Also, this is the first time I'm sitting in this chair. I got this off Facebook Marketplace back in December, I think, when I moved into this place, and this is my first time sitting in it. But I recently moved it. It was in the middle of the room and I moved it to the corner of the room because I'm getting a new couch. Anyway, I was just playing around with stuff and I kind of love it here. I think I'm gonna really love to read in this chair. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We will start in January. The very first book I read this year was Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, and I am always hesitant and a little bit weary of the more classic books simply because a lot of them I just feel so stupid when I'm reading them, because a lot of them are very poetic or they sort of are a vibe read versus like a plot. Do you know what I'm saying? What do you know? This one was very much more of a vibe read than a plot. Granted, there was of course a story to it, but overall, I like to read the classics, 1, to say that I did, and 2, because I feel like it's important to be cultured and literate and I don't know, just be like well-rounded. I like to at least have it under my belt because I do think it's important, and a lot of references and jokes and songs and movies all kind of stem from classic books, but I just have a really hard time loving them. The only silver lining with that is a lot of more classic books are relatively small, not super lengthy, and especially this one, the pages, like where the writing is on the pages is, that's what I'm saying, it's so poetic. It's only a small fraction of the page that's actually used for the writing, so even though it's 200 something pages, it reads like a 100 something page book. I got through this one pretty quickly if I remember correctly. Well, I think I started it in December. You guys know during Vlogmas I'm never reading because I don't have time because I'm editing every night. I think this got away from me and I didn't end up finishing it till January. I ended up giving Play It As It Lays 3 stars. It explores women in crises within American society and life in the late 1960s, I believe, and it jumps between Hollywood and Las Vegas. The story follows the female main character, Maria. Maria is an actress and she's sort of wandering through life with this like dissociated attitude or way, mostly because her future and her really important life decisions are essentially controlled by the patriarchy and men in her life. Joan Didion does a really good job though of writing in a way that translates Maria's discontent and disconnect from her life. It's almost like there's a disconnect between the life that's playing out in front of her and the woman who lives within her. As a woman, it was interesting to read about a woman just living in a different time period, but also experiencing a lot of the same lived experiences and traumas and dynamics that I, as a woman, live today. It was definitely insightful. It was definitely an important read, but just not my favorite overall. I just like when books captivate me. I like to get lost in a story, and this one just didn't feel like that. Like instead of a story, it felt like a book. The next book that I read in January was Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. Well, it's either second or third, depending on when you read the Assassin's Blade book of novellas, which I'll get to. But so I read Crown of Midnight second, right after Throne of Glass. I gave this book 4 stars, and I believe I gave Crown of Midnight 5 stars. Also, I should mention, like, I don't really do half ratings or anything. I just kind of stick to whole numbers just because I just find it easier that way. I'm pretty certain and decisive with my ratings. The difference between a 4 and a 5 is honestly decently drastic, but also a book being a 4 doesn't mean I didn't love it. You know what I'm saying? I feel like I give a lot of books a 3. So for it to get a 4, it had to be good. So this book follows the female main character, Celaena Sardothien, who is the newly elected King's Champion, and essentially she is tasked with the job of putting an end to this rising rebel group that's fighting against the king and his crown. But Celaena is very intelligent and also is not one to kind of fall victim to the evil that's sort of hiding behind the king and his power. She's very aware of how corrupt the king is and is not exactly loyal to the king, despite what you might think, seeing that she is literally the elected king's champion. So throughout the story, Celaena attempts to sort of uncover mysteries within the glass castle and questions that she has, and while doing so, she sort of unveils that the secrets living there are far more complex and, I guess, unsettling is a good word, than she originally assumed or prepared for. There are small bits of romance in this book, but also just within the series so far. Nothing insane, but there definitely is some romance situations happening. And in the first book, it was kind of with a couple of men, sort of this like romantic-esque relationship or vibe. And in this book, it was just really with one man, but at least for me, it was not who I expected it to be. Like after finishing the last book, I didn't really think that the man that she's sort of involved with in this book would be the person that it is. If you guys are just getting into fantasy, I really do recommend this series just because as someone who this is their first fantasy series and also kind of assumed I would hate it, I think this is a really good place to start. It definitely has those elements of fantasy and just like this world, and there's, you know, magic and power and mythical creatures and things that would never exist outside of a fantastical world, but it's not to the point where it's like, okay, like we're making up a new language here. There's definitely like things in here where I'm like, oh, that's just a collection of letters formed together to make a name of something, but it's not everything. There's definitely some interesting names in here, especially like different areas within the continent and whatever, but it's not so hard to follow that you're like, okay. It's very much just a good story that has the fantasy elements thrown in and kind of like the quirky fantastical names thrown in as well. It's definitely not, you don't have to be super into fantasy or become super duper involved with the world in order to enjoy this book, though I will say, if you enjoy this book, you probably will become pretty enthralled with the world, because every time I'm reading a book in this series, my brain revolves around Celaena Sardothien, and I swear I feel like Celaena Sardothien, like I'm living as her. I feel like I'm within the castle. It just like takes over my mind, but mostly just because I really love this story and I'm really connected with the characters. And believe it or not, I think this is my first series I've read, at least as an adult. I read a couple of Twilight books when I was younger, and I'm trying to think what else. I think I read a couple of Hunger Games books as well, but I've never complete a series as far as I know. So that's gonna be really fun to complete this one day. The further you get into the series, the more you want to read more of the series because you do just get more and more connected with the characters. I did give it the 4-star, not a 5-star, just because it didn't hold up to the first book. The next book that I read in January was Blue Light Hours by Bruna Dantas Lobato. This is a Brazilian author. I found this book, I was at a bookstore in Berkeley during Thanksgiving time. I came across this book and it really intrigued me without like getting too deep into it. Any story or movie that has to do with like relationship between mom and daughter or dad and daughter for some reason is always really appealing to me. I rated this book a 3-star. There was a couple reasons for that. The main one being I wish there was more turmoil between the mom and the daughter. Well, let me summarize. Essentially, this book is a story of a long distance relationship between a mom in Brazil and a daughter who left the country to study in America at a school in Vermont. This book is a dual POV, being the mother and the daughter, but it's almost entirely the daughter. The majority of the story is the daughter. You just get a very small snippet of the mother's perspective later on in the book. And throughout the entire book, there is this deep yearning sensation from both sides, like from the mother to the daughter and also from the daughter to the mother, but then also extending outward to the mother and her life and the daughter and her new life and the daughter and her old life. Like there's just so much yearning. Even when things weren't sad, it was one of those books where I just felt sad and like melancholy while reading this. It felt very real. There was nothing dramatic per se that happened in this book. Like really nothing even happened. It was one of those books where it was really just a story about a relationship versus a story about something happening. It was just a story of being. The story just felt so heavy and so filled with emotion. And throughout the entire book, the daughter is really working through mourning and missing her mom and her old life and worrying about her mother's health and well-being, and also adjusting to life in an entirely new country with an entirely new way of life in a new language, all that comes along with that, and also redefining herself as the woman that she is becoming 4,000 miles away from the girl she always was. Like I said, overall, it was just very melancholy, definitely a downer book, like not a happy read. But again, like nothing traumatic happened, and I think that's what I was really missing in this story. I wanted there to be more, just everything. Like I wanted something bad to happen, quite frankly. Like I wanted there to be an event or breakthrough or an argument or a disagreement, like anything, and there kind of just wasn't. Like there really was this mutual respect between mom and daughter, even though you were still getting sort of like the behind the scenes of like not necessarily being on the same page. Overall, it was a very level story, and that's why I'm using the word melancholy. It just felt very like through and through. I felt like there was so much potential for this to be really heart-wrenching, and it just wasn't. It fell a little bit short for me. The next book I read is Old Enough by Haley Jacobson, and this book has been on my bookshelf in my TBR for the longest time. I think like nearly a year, and I've been meaning to read it, never did. Heard so many good things about it, and I always just like pushed it off. Finally got around to reading it because I needed something a little bit lighthearted after those first 3 books of the year. I gave this book 3 stars. The story follows the female main character, Savannah Henry, who is going through the growing pains of adolescence and young adulthood that we all know and hate. Savannah is a college student who is coming to terms with her sexual identity and orientation while outgrowing longtime friendships and establishing herself with new friends and new people and new communities. However, Savannah's relationship with her childhood best friend Izzy is extremely plagued by something very traumatic that happened when she was a bit younger. And this trauma has been extremely heavy for Savannah, and she's carried it, and it's really burdened her and haunted her for much of her adolescence and adulthood. I don't want to give too much more away than that, just because I feel like the trauma itself is sort of within the story that unfolds. Like it's not like a fact that you're kind of just given, it's sort of part of the story. I will say I think I talked about this in a vlog when I finished this book, but I felt like it would have resonated a bit more had I read this a few years ago when maybe my brain wasn't fully developed yet. I was still kind of exploring who I was, who I liked, what I identified as, things of that nature. I think had I read this in college, I really would have felt very connected to Savannah and to a lot of what she's experiencing. But I did feel like I was a little bit above this. Not that I'm like above it, like better than it, but I'm saying like these experiences that she's going through is something that I feel like I've already lived and overcome versus currently living. And because of that, it felt a little bit like, the word juvenile keeps coming to my brain, but that's not what I mean at all. It just feels a little bit like a past life, one that I've already moved on from. Younger me would have needed this and eaten this up and taken so many important lessons from this book. But as I was reading it, I didn't learn anything new, I guess I should say. It felt like I was just reliving things, which sometimes is a good thing, but I just felt a little bit like been there, done that with this. But it was a really great story. My only real complaint, and this is just like very much personal preference, it was a little cringy. But not the whole story, just a few things in here where I'm like, but then I'm like, I'm not sure if that was the point. You know, because like the things that were cringy in here, I wouldn't have found cringy when I was going through this phase of life. Versus like now that I'm out of it, I'm like, oh God, that's so cringe. So maybe that was kind of the point. But regardless, I would highly recommend this to you guys if you are sort of in that more exploratory phase of life. Or just in general. It was a good, easy, lighthearted, well, there was some stuff in there that was a little more heavy, but overall, relatively lighthearted, easy read, and a good palate cleanser between stories. If you guys are in my book club, this book will look awfully familiar. This was the February book club book pick. It's Two Step Devil by Jamie Quattro. If you guys aren't in my book club, a little self-promo, I do a free book club on the app Fable, and essentially every month we vote on a book and we read it, and at the end of the month we come together in one of the group chats on the app and we just kind of discuss the book. It's super casual, like really nothing major at all. You can skip a month or a book or whatever if you want, join in when you want. It's very casual, very low maintenance, just like do it as you want. For the very first month, which we're only on our second month now, so the very first month while it was still like getting established, I went ahead and picked the book myself. I picked Two Step Devil because I had this book on my shelf, my TBR. I was like, you know what, I've been meaning to read this. This will get me to read it. It's a book that I was like a little bit unsure of, so I was like, it'll be fun to have others reading it with me to sort of like give me the motivation to read it. You guys, this book was bizarre, so strange in so many ways. I gave it 3 stars, but I honestly kind of feel like it's a 2-star. While I was reading it, I was like, okay, this is a 2-star. 1 star, 2 stars, pushing it. But then when I finished it, I was able to sort of look at everything and I was kind of like, you know what? That was kind of more of a 3-star because it really did make me think. This is a really disturbing novel about a male main character who calls himself the Prophet. And the Prophet lives in this off-grid cabin where he paints these visions that he has or that he experiences. And his visions end up leading him to this girl named Michael. He takes her under his wing without her consent in an attempt to like save her, I guess you could say. Essentially, he abducts her, point blank period, but he has no intent to harm her. He really thinks he's saving her or like helping her. The Prophet's visions mostly revolve around religion and like spirituality. If you're familiar with the Bible at all, a lot of like his visions or topics or scenarios that happen sort of within his vision are taken from biblical stories. And I personally believe, and I think it's quite evident, that he's in some sort of religious psychosis. The problem was, it was really hard to tell when we were reading about the Prophet and when we were within his vision. Like, it would sort of be telling the tale of the Prophet, but then all of a sudden you'd be living the visions of the Prophet. There was this like random screenplay in the middle of the book. Don't know what that was about. I genuinely have no idea what was happening there. I think maybe we were in one of his visions, but literally it was actually just open to it, written like a playwright. Like, that is a play. And you know what's funny is, like, as I'm explaining this, I'm like, wow, that sounds like such a good book. I think if I was watching this video right now, I would be like, I'm gonna read it. Like, I know she said she doesn't like it, but I'm gonna read it. The problem is the idea is there. The topic is there. The performance was not there. The potential is absolutely there. I want someone else to take this idea and write a better story. It didn't land for me. An interesting one. Very interesting. Finally, I did read a thriller. I read Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. Honestly, I was a bit disappointed by this just because I do really like Lisa Jewell's books and I have enjoyed other books from her more. I gave this one 3 stars. The story follows a mother of a girl who went tragically missing 10 years ago when she was only 15. And the mother, Laurel Mack, she is living a life in ruins after the disappearance of her daughter. Well, first of all, her daughter is missing. Second of all, her marriage fell apart and she has a very strained relationship with her other daughter. One day, Laurel ends up meeting this man in a coffee shop named Floyd, and she is instantly wooed by, she kind of doesn't know what, I guess like his charisma. Something about the way he was with her just really intrigued her, and it kind of caught her off guard just because ever since her marriage did fall apart and she got the divorce and ever since her daughter went missing, she just hadn't really put any thought into seeing other people or the dating world or anything. It just like hadn't really crossed her mind. Suddenly she met this random stranger and he seemed really interested in her sort of out of nowhere, and just the sheer fact of the matter of the fact that he was so interested in her sort of made her intrigued by him. But as with any thriller, as the story unfolded, we find out that there's actually various connections between Floyd and Laurel's past that ends up revealing more and more secrets, leaving Laurel more and more confused with more and more unanswered questions. Overall though, it was one of those thrillers that's more of a slow burn, unpack it as you read versus a quick plot twist that like you didn't see coming. We kind of knew things before the characters did, and I just don't think I love that as much. Like, I much prefer just like a quick twist where we are finding out at the same time as the characters versus like this slow burn, slow unfold that we sort of know before the character knows, and then like when they find out, it's like we get their reaction, but we already knew. I don't know, by the time they find out, it's kind of old news to you. I just don't prefer that in thrillers. I want to be shocked. It was just okay. Not remarkable. I just read this recently, but this is probably going to be a book that I don't necessarily remember a lot of in a few months. But I mean, I enjoyed reading it. I think I read it decently quick, but it was just okay. And lastly, but most definitely not least, the last, or I should say most recent book that I've read is The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is the collection of novellas for the Throne of Glass series. I think technically it goes first, but a lot of people say to read it third. So per all of your advice, when I started the series, I decided to read this third after Crown of Midnight. So as I mentioned, it's a collection of prequel novellas to the Throne of Glass series. It's split up into five different novellas. It's all one book, and they are kind of all interconnected, but also they're all kind of standalone, if that makes sense. Just standalone stories of Selena Sardathian and her past. Each novella takes the reader through different significant time periods or events in Selena Sardathian's past that shaped her into who she is, and also sort of explain why she does certain things she does, and also sort of explains different things that were hinted at or referenced to within the first 2 books of the series. I wouldn't say this is like essential to the series. You definitely could go without reading this, but I do feel like it helped me connect on a deeper level with the plot and the female main character Selena and the world. And I also feel like I probably will look back on this as I continue the series being like, oh, I'm glad I read that, because I wouldn't have understood this and that or this person or whatever as deeply as I do if I hadn't read that. Like, I think it's sort of like you can still read the whole series and understand it and be connected to it without reading this, but having read this, you're able to connect and understand on a deeper level in a more complex way. It was good. but not my favorite from the series, so I did give it a 3-star. And with that, those are all of the books that I've read this year so far. I'm currently reading March's Book of the Month book pick, which we actually voted on this month, Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. Is that what her name is? Jessica Knoll? Yeah. For some reason, it's like taking me a long time. I just like haven't had much time to sit down and read, but I'm really enjoying it. I hope you guys enjoyed my very first official sit down book video. I really enjoyed filming this. It kind of felt like my podcast days, which is a whole nother topic for another day. But I love you guys. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys so super soon in the next video. Bye. Mwah.